Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. I've made quite a few videos so far talking about the It Ends With Us fallout, and you can find my Baldoni Baloney playlist linked in the description below. I will continue not to take seriously complaints that it is somehow racist. To call him that, not only have I been clearly using baloney as a synonym for malarkey or bullshit this whole time, but it is also genuinely impossible to be racist against an Italian man on the basis of his Italianism. He's a white man from California. A Justin Bologna is a poor little soaking wet meow meow who hired a crisis PR agency to retaliate against a woman he sexually harassed on the set of a movie he was directing and starring in. He's not the victim of an anti-Italian hate crime from another white American, be that me or Blake Lively. And in this video, I would like to talk a bit about the honestly bizarre way that even people who aren't coming at me specifically in bad faith over the world's easiest pun based on a guy's bad behavior and name that sounds like baloney have been framing Baldoni as if he's pretty much anything other than a Californian white man. But first, I'd like to thank my friends at Aura for sponsoring today's video. Everyone's talking so much about poor little Justin Baldoni getting his movie stolen, but do you know what people actually steal? Your personal data. And they can have it for months before you even hear about it, which means by the time we get one of those breach notification emails, the bad actors who want that information already have a head start on us. IBM says that companies take an average of 277 days to report a breach, so those headlines we see all the time about major leaks aren't even always all that recent. So by the time we even hear about it, our information has already been circulating for months. And usually the best that gets offered is free credit monitoring after the fact, which really doesn't help all that much. It's like getting security cameras after your house has already been robbed. So instead, for this and many other reasons, I rely on Aura. Aura keeps an eye on my personal data, including my social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records to alert me about potential identity theft, and they also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance in case the worst happens. It's more than just ID monitoring and alerts, though. Aura also provides a VPN with over 100 virtual locations, a secure password manager, of an antivirus software, and tools to block malicious sites. And my favorite feature, personally, it sends opt-out requests on your behalf to the data broker websites that sell your data for profit in the first place. Look, I get it. There are so many data breaches that your social security number might as well be written on a bathroom stall. But if you haven't been a victim of fraud yet, then why are you still rolling the dice? If it's because protecting yourself feels overwhelming, let Aura do the hard work for you. You can go to my link, aura.com/ofidoki, to try 14 days for free, and that will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed. Thank you again to Aura, sincerely, both for sponsoring this video and for helping to keep me safe online. Now, let's process some baloney. As always, there has been a flood of articles concerning the Lively Baldoni lawsuits over the last couple of weeks, and I haven't touched back on that since my video where I read Blake's amended complaint, so we're gonna do that here today. I do have a live stream where I read the entirety of the Hollywood Reporter article that we'll be discussing today, so you can listen to that if you don't want to read it for yourself, but you can find both the article and my live stream about it linked in the description below. This particular article came out pretty much right on the heels of Blake's amended complaint, and I have been referring to it as the Baha'i angle ever since I first read it. The Hollywood Reporter has, like pretty much every publication and many YouTube channels, taken pretty much every side in their coverage of this situation. Sometimes, like when they published an article with an interview from an intimacy coordinator, they seem to understand that this is a situation stemming from workplace sexual harassment and a retaliatory campaign. But they were also, from what I've seen, the first to report on the creative differences and multiple cuts of the film narrative in the cloud of reporting following Blake and Justin not being photographed together at the premiere of the film, which I think makes the Hollywood Reporter one of the 4 majors that the PR team bragged in their group chat about convincing to stand down in their reporting of the sexual harassment. This particular article is very much attempting to play both sides at the same time. It literally ends by asking if they could both be right, but the path that it takes to get there is disingenuous on so many levels, so I would like to go through some of those. Justin Baldoni's Leap of Faith, written by Peter Kiefer, is an article that does a lot of things. It tries to paint a workplace sexual harassment issue as a cultural difference between the secular actresses and an apparently Baha'i-informed workplace culture. We'll get back to that. and it tries to take both sides. It also outs Jenny Slate as having made a complaint and tells a version of that story. It wasn't just Baldoni who ran into issues when interacting with cast members. The Hollywood Reporter has learned more about the nature of the complaint that It Ends With Us actress Jenny Slate lodged, which is referenced in court documents but with Slate's name redacted. It stemmed from an interaction with Heath about the apartment Slate had rented in New York City, where It Ends With Us was shooting. Slate, who has a toddler, told him she wasn't thrilled with the space she had rented, but that moving wasn't an option because she didn't want to lose the sizable security deposit, around $15,000. Heath informed Slate that Wayfarer would reimburse her for the lost security deposit so she could find better accommodations, but apparently he made the offer using language that made Slate uncomfortable. Sources say he focused intensely on the sanctity of motherhood and Slate's role as a mother. According to sources, Sony became aware of Slate's concerns and informed Wayfarer about them. A spokesperson for Slate did not return multiple requests for comment. According to a source, Heath has a different understanding of their interaction. He's told people that even when Wayfarer offered a kind gesture, it was weaponized against them. The first thing I want to point out before going any further is that if we compare this to Blake's amended complaint, which I'm not reading in this video just for the interest of time, but I have read in my most recent video on the Baldoni Baloney playlist, Blake's complaint does not name the other women on set who were uncomfortable but who will later testify. But in the complaint, it specifically references Baldoni before it goes into the conversations that Blake and this other woman on set had with Ange Giannetti and their attempts to get Sony involved. It does not talk about Heath. My immediate thought reading this, and the way that it goes from a spokesperson for Slate not responding during multiple requests for comments to a Heath-friendly source, is that it was, in fact, the Heath-friendly source who attached Jenny's name to this story. Which, again, as I have already said about Baldoni putting those texts from Isabel in his complaint, is really reckless about the safety of the women involved tangentially in this, who are already experiencing threats and harassment. Really irresponsible in a way that I would think a feminist would probably try not to be. Per usual, though, the Baldoni stans are crowing about how this complaint had nothing to do with Justin, or that it was a nothing burger, and that it somehow means Blake lied, because these people let Baldoni convince them that all of those out-of-context screenshots with scribbled on lines and circles are normal in a court filing, but that outlining what your witnesses are going to say when they testify only holds as much weight as rumors. Like, okay, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that Blake's lawyers are smart enough to know that if they completely misrepresented what the witnesses are going to say, the judge would in fact hold that against them. I also think it's worth just taking a moment to discuss what is actually conveyed in the article here. Ignoring Heath's thing about how anytime he did something nice, it was used against him, I think kind of echoed in the, well, he thought Blake Lively wanted to see the video of his wife giving birth. We're going to look just at what we actually read about their interaction, and not about how Heath feels about it. A man who worked at a company that seems to be fairly pushy with its religion, again, we'll get to it, talked to a woman who was his employee about the sanctity of motherhood and her role as a mother. And he did it in such a way that she felt uncomfortable enough to lodge an HR complaint. I saw some people saying that she accepted the offer, which is not stated in this article, and I think would have been if she did. I think Heath would have said, and also she took the money. Or, I'm sorry, the source close to Heath would have said that she took the money. We're pretending that didn't come directly from him, but I do have a feeling that even the person speaking on his behalf got that story from him. How goddamn creepy is Mr. Look at this video of my wife giving birth, I thought you wanted to see it, and the way that he phrased this offer for Jenny Slate to turn down like 15 grand. I think it's extremely likely, given the phrasing in this super softball reporting about it, that it was some, your most important job is being a mother, and we need to make sure that baby you birthed has enough space to play type shit, and that it was delivered in a way that very clearly made Jenny Slate uncomfortable. But also, Jenny Slate was not trying to publicize this. It seems like she was going to let Jamey Heath get away with it, other than that she might have complained to Sony. She wasn't talking about this in the press. And if she has filed an official complaint, good. I think an HR complaint for a weird conversation with your boss who has something to say about motherhood having sanctity is more than justified, and I feel entirely baffled by people who are acting as though it isn't. Even still, not only do we not know if that's the only complaint Jenny Slate filed, we have really good indications that it was not, in fact, the only complaint she filed. But just like they've managed to turn a conversation about workplace sexual harassment and labor issues into a referendum on whether or not a woman is likable enough not to deserve a smear campaign, they are intentionally refocusing the conversation to be about things that Team Baldoni feels they can handle, which at this point is pretty clearly just directing the blame onto a woman, some woman, any woman, apparently, as long as it's away from Baldoni. Away from Baldoni and on to Jenny Slate. Jenny Slate, whose nose Baldoni made fun of much more directly than Blake made fun of his, who Baldoni hasn't made any kind of statement to tell his fans to stop attacking while he settles his grievances with Blake in court, because he hasn't made that kind of statement about any of the women in the super feminist movie that he'd filmed on his super feminist set. So that's my rebuttal for as far as the big reveal of this article goes, that they were willing to out Jenny Slate for a complaint in specific, but not for likely the entirety of her complaints. We still don't know what else is going to come out. Now, I'm going to unpack the rest of what makes me just so angry about this article and how it ties into our larger thesis of people are offering Justin Baldoni passes that he does not deserve. This article very sincerely attempts to make a cultural differences argument, which is why I opened by reminding you that Justin Bologna is a white man from California. He grew up in California and Oregon. I'm not whitewashing him beyond the way that he would describe himself if his book Man Enough is an acceptable source. He's a white guy from California. But this Hollywood Reporter article plays a truly bizarre trick. It kind of implies, actually, what if this guy's religion actually means that he sexually harasses people, and secular women who object to that are actually simply misunderstanding his culture? And actually, you know what? I don't think my summation of it is even as bizarre as the actual argument that gets made, so let me just read it to you here. From the outset, the Lively versus Baldoni feud has been framed as the newest chapter in Hollywood's ongoing fight for gender equality. It has rekindled increasingly dormant debates about sexual harassment and power dynamics, and that framing certainly could fit the facts. We'll have to see how it plays out in court. But there's also another possibility, one that has less to do with gender equality than it does a simple cultural misunderstanding. What if much of it, the alleged inappropriate hugging and pre-filming praying, could be explained as a clash between a very specific faith-driven community with its unique mores and a much more modern post-#MeToo one with its own set of beliefs and commandments. So Wayfarer has never made much of a secret about being a Baha'i company, at least not to my knowledge, despite text messages from the PR group fretting about coverage that included reference to the religion getting out while they were intentionally muddying the narrative against Blake. And I also want to say that the things that I'm saying about Wayfarer are specific to Wayfarer, not to anyone who practices Baha'i or everyone who practices Baha'i. I'm not educated enough in this subject to speak broadly, only on what I have directly watched and read from myself. And because Baldoni speaks about his religion nearly every time he's given a remote chance, there's plenty for me to form my own opinions on about what Baldoni, Heath, and their billionaire backer Steve Sarowitz in particular are doing with Wayfarer, which I think you could draw a pretty close equivalent to by merging that great American family homophobic Christmas movies Hallmark schism with just the general idea of elevating Baldoni to a Tom Cruise equivalency, but for Baha'i instead of as the boy king of Scientology. I already thought that even before this article came out. The thing that tipped me off was actually in Baldoni's complaint, when they go out of their way to hold the presence of alcohol at the movie premiere up against Wayfarer having a dry party, and they say that it was reflecting their company values. While I wouldn't call Baha'i itself a cult, I will absolutely easily say that Wayfarer has, for about as long as I've been looking into it, struck me as culty, and Baha'i just happens to be what they're using as their working foundation for that cultiness at Wayfarer. And then this article came out, and it felt like it confirmed quite a bit of that to me. The article actually begins with an anecdote, a fake out as if Colleen Hoover actually were Baha'i, and then clarifying that while that's not true, it was apparently a rumor on the set of the movie. That people were going around on the set of It Ends With Us and saying that that was how Baldoni secured the rights, was bonding with Colleen Hoover over their shared faith. It mentions a source close to Hoover saying that she was upset to learn about the rumor after filming Wrapped, but she ultimately decided to let it go. A few things that are interesting to me here. The article does pretty much nothing to hide its pro-Baldoni slant. That's pretty obvious even just in the icky cover where Blake is portrayed as the one attacking him, but it's also pretty much just going to come right out and say it. They have that source close to Colleen, apparently, but here's how they describe the people they spoke to. Over the past several weeks, The Hollywood Reporter has interviewed multiple friends and former colleagues of Baldoni, along with members of the Baha'i community, to piece together if and how this religion might have inadvertently contributed to the situation. So, reading really closely here, they spoke to Baldoni sources and not Lively sources, because only one of these two celebrities are actively feeding the press the way Brian Friedman is about Baldoni. So, the article talks a bit about how Baldoni has never made any secret of his religion. It mentions that his mother and father both converted to Baha'i before he was born and that he was raised in it, and it describes Baha'i as being based on notions of humanity, universalism, and gender equality. It continues, what's also clear from talking to people in his orbit is that Baldoni has his own unique way of communicating and behaving. Much of it is informed by the tenor of his religion. His unique mannerisms have at times come into conflict with Hollywood's current ethos, which in the wake of the hashtag #MeToo and Black Lives Matter movements and the COVID pandemic has become far more rigid, uniform, and policed. When analyzed through the prism of a 180-year-old faith that has a strong mystical component to it, at least some portions of this dispute start to make more sense. The 180-year-old faith thing is pretty wild to me because I feel like you could pin a length of time to any religion and then say, analyzed through the lens of a 2,000-year-old faith, right? To try to make something sound mystical, unless we're supposed to be taken aback by it being new. But the length of the religion is pretty irrelevant in either direction. It's an established religion that Baldoni has been following for his entire life. He wasn't there 180 years ago. He's there now. There being California. Again, American white guy. I don't want to read this entire article to you, but I do want to back up my thesis about Wayfarer being a Baha'i Trojan horse, so here's another quote. When Baldoni and Wayfarer executives hold meetings, they often start by asking participants to go around the table and share something private, something that brings them joy and has nothing to do with their jobs or their career. In certain professional circles, like, say, those of yoga instructors and doulas, this type of icebreaker might be welcomed. But among time-crunched agents, entertainment lawyers, and studio executives, folks not exactly known for their touchy-feely ways, a gesture of this nature comes with risks. In my head, I was like, I'm sorry, are we at Cafe Fucking Gratitude? Says a female executive at a production company who sat down with Wayfarer executives last year, including Baldoni. Why are you imposing your culture on this meeting that's being held at our offices? I can't explain exactly why, but it made me so uncomfortable. I do think I can at least try to explain. I think it made her uncomfortable because it's weird. It's a weird request. It's a request that literally asks for something private, something not included in the scope of what you're signing up to share with your coworkers when you're at work. Later on, there's a mention from one of those Baldoni sources that this is a double standard because if a woman started asking for those kinds of things at the beginning of a meeting, people totally wouldn't find it weird. And I don't think that's true, but I think it does track with a lot of what Baldoni's very binary gender role rhetoric that I've heard is from him and his wife. This article and Baldoni both launder the same understanding of Baha'i, that it is inherently feminist on account of it believes in equality, though Baldoni and Heath, who had the weird opinion about the sacredness of motherhood, is always using the same bird wing analogy about men and women being separate wings of a bird and one is wounded. And also, I'm going to just directly pull from Kat Tenbarge's excellent coverage of this from Spitfire. The article said that Baha'i is based on gender equality, even though women cannot serve in its highest institution, the Universal House of Justice. Now, Baha'i seems to be somewhat decentralized, even though it does have institutions, so which I mentioned to say that I'm in no way saying that everyone who practices is sexist, but I am saying nobody who practices this or any religion is inherently a feminist just because their religion tells them that they are, but also has contradictory rules about what it actually thinks women should be able to have the right to do. And I will be exploring Baldoni's fake feminism in its own video. I do think that's a deeper dive than I want to do while I talk about these attempts to frame him as if he's not a Californian white man. Even before It Ends With Us, Baldoni wasn't afraid to inject elements of his religion on the set. He did talk about his religion a lot, says a source who worked on the 2019 coming-of-age romance 5 Feet Apart, which Baldoni directed. This had shades of Scientology, but with less of the prominence and people hovering at all times. Another source who also worked on 5 Feet Apart, however, has a very different impression of Baldoni and the influence of his religion on set. I've never worked with a male director who was so worried about everyone's emotional and mental well-being, says the source. There was an openness and emotionality to his style that was more typical of a woman, and it probably wouldn't be an issue if it was a female director because of the preconceived notions of gender. But if you get a bunch of Teamsters together who are told that they should share their feelings, of course someone is going to ask, why is he such a freak? But Justin genuinely believes that if we do this, we'll work better as a group. There's a little bit of an arrogance to it. It's like he doesn't want to acknowledge the world we live in. Because Baldoni wasn't merely directing It Ends With Us, but also producing it through Wayfarer, the Baha'i faith was an even more pronounced on-set presence during production. On the first day of filming, several members of the crew participated in a Baha'i prayer, according to a source. Other sources report that Baldoni frequently would ask God for guidance before making big creative decisions on the film. Two more sources noted that there was an unusual amount of physical contact in the form of hugging among crew members. It's not how anything works. You are not allowed suddenly to have physical contact that makes people uncomfortable just because you think that you can argue that it's more normal in your religion that the other people are not also part of. You're also not allowed to run around saying that you're speaking to someone's recently deceased father without them thinking you're weird as fuck for it. And if they ask you to stop and you keep doing it, you're creating a hostile work environment. This is also especially interesting to try to explain away under the Baha'i angle because I've seen people say in pretty much every source about this that claiming to speak to the dead is fairly fringe. So it seems like this is a meow meow special. The article continues. There is nothing in the sacred Baha'i texts on how to behave on a movie set. There's nothing that addresses how to collaborate with an A-list movie star, but whether it was from his religion, his natural personality, or his self-admitted neurodivergence, referenced in the court documents, people who have worked with Baldoni say that he tends to be deferential, sometimes too much so. And it goes into more meow meow shit about his movie getting stolen, but I just want to rip my hair out reading this because even if the sacred Baha'i text said to sexually harass and then put out a smear campaign against your lead, which they don't say, it would still not make it okay and then make it simply a cultural misunderstanding for a hostile work environment to be created because of that. It is absolutely bewildering to me. This is a white man in California. He's been on other movie sets. He's interacted with women. He's been here in America during Me Too and everything since. And the thing he seemed to learn from when he watched all that play out at the same time as the rest of us is, oh, I should hire the PR firm that got everybody to act absolutely unhinged about Amber Heard and send them a screenshot of a hate post against a woman and tell them that I want that. Another way Justin Baldoni is framed as a minority here is because it is so tempting to draw a false equivalence between Blake Lively's past racism and this current dispute that she has against a white man. Because everybody is telling you about her racism from the past right now as if it is relevant to her sexual harassment complaint, and it is simply not. It is not erasing that racism to say that it existed and also is not relevant here to this specific interpersonal dynamic. Justin Baldoni is white. He played a Latino character on Jane the Virgin, and some people have conceptualized that because he passed as a person of color on television in a role that they later had to retcon into being adopted, that he is in fact a person of color in real life or should be treated as though he pretty much is. I don't think that's true, and that's not true. This is a situation primarily among white people, other than Jamey Heath, who has not denied that he showed Blake Lively the naked video of his wife. It's not racist for her not to want Jamey Heath to show her a video of his wife giving birth. In fact, it's just very normal. In Man Enough, Baldoni does write about being cast as characters who were not white like him. He writes, "My agent and manager then flat out asked me if I was willing to trim and pluck my eyebrows because it would help me get these kinds of parts. What exactly were these kinds of parts? I couldn't articulate it then, but I am able to now. These were parts that were set up to be played by traditionally white guys. The irony? I am white. But to Hollywood, I wasn't white enough. My features were too ambiguous for the industry's definition of whiteness, and as a result, I found myself getting more auditions for characters that were Spanish, Latino, or Middle Eastern. One of the first roles that I booked was an Iraqi prince on a TV show in the early 2000s called Jag. I remember walking into the audition room where there were probably 10 other guys to audition, every one of them Middle Eastern. Guess who got the part? The white guy. When I asked if I should learn an Iraqi accent, the producers told my manager not to worry about it, that I was Americanized. When it finally came out on TV several months later, guess what had been done? My voice had been dubbed. They took a Middle Eastern man's voice and put it over mine, so it was my face with his voice. But as I said, I am just beginning to learn this. I didn't have this knowledge and awareness when I was getting rejected for the traditionally white roles and taking the roles of characters who were not white. In fact, I can remember conversations in auditions or on sets with other actors where we would share our experiences, and a black actor would share about how he was able to book more roles than his girlfriend, because even though he knew she was a better actor, he was light-skinned and she had darker skin. In an attempt to connect, which in hindsight I can see now how it would do the exact opposite, I would say something like, I feel you, man. This town can't figure out my ethnicity and doesn't know where to put me. Now, while that may have been true, my experience is very different as a white man, and by over-identifying my experience with the experience of people of color, I am disregarding the structures and systems in place that benefit me and disadvantage people of color. And one more read. Fast forward to 10 years later, when I came back from my break from acting, and one of the first auditions I got was for Raphael Solano on Jane the Virgin. I saw that the character was intended to be Latino, but I didn't give it any thought. After all, I was so used to auditioning for these roles that I often joked that I didn't know I was Latino until I moved to Hollywood. Looking back, it's not nearly as funny as I thought it was. Mostly because after spending 5 years on a show surrounded by Latinx actors, I see the intense barriers that they have all had to overcome to get where they are. And while, like them, I may have worked my ass off and sacrificed and dedicated years of my life before finally getting a break, I still had an unfair advantage no matter how you slice it. Now, unknown to me at the time, the CW had been looking for Raphael for months and had screen tested a bunch of guys but hadn't found him. So they ended up opening the role to all ethnicities. That's why when I showed up for the audition, it was filled with people of all ethnicities, including a few blonde, blue-eyed white guys. So again, I didn't think anything of it. The rest is history, as I ended up getting the role, and like I've said, it was the role of a lifetime for me, and potentially one of the reasons you are even reading this book. The role gave me the chance to play an interesting man on a primetime television show, to find a way to portray authentically the inner life of a confused and beaten down masculine man who is forced to go on a journey to explore his identity and his masculinity. I didn't think twice, or even once, about if I had taken a role from a Latino actor because there were so many other folks auditioning. Raphael didn't have a backstory, and it eventually was written that he's Italian, but there's a lot of questioning and fair criticism of his character's racial and ethnic ambiguity, considering the Venezuelan roots of the original show. With the privilege of hindsight and new to me information, I can absolutely see how I took a role from a Latino actor. I can see how the systems that are in place, the same ones that gave me the role of an Iraqi prince, the same ones that allowed me to be in a position to write this book and have this platform, play to my advantage. As I've begun to learn these nuances, I can feel my white privilege rearing its head and telling me, but I've worked hard, and I've been rejected too, and I deserve roles too. Again, recognizing my white privilege doesn't negate my efforts and worth, nor does it negate my struggle. Just because I am white, it does not mean my life is easy and that everything is just given to me. White privilege is not a free pass by any means. At the same time, I can no longer ignore that overarchingly, white people are not oppressed in the same way that black people are. We are not judged, pulled over, enslaved, imprisoned, or killed in the same way. I don't have the additional hurdles that have been placed in the lanes of black people, indigenous people, and other people of color. And, like in the situation of getting the Iraqi prince role, it means that in some situations, not only do I have the hurdle, but I also have a head start. So, no, Baldoni is not a person of color, and he seems to have been aware of that when he wrote his book. Blake Lively's history of racism does not apply to whether or not she was sexually harassed or whether or not he retaliated. But do you know what is relevant if we want to talk about someone's racism on like a movie set or like a production company maybe? Because this Baha'i angle is not the only recent coverage of Baldoni. There was also an article in the LA Times. And despite the paranoid reading in the 11 billion pro-Justin snark subreddits that pop up in my Reddit feed constantly, I am very sure that this LA Times article is also coming from Camp Baldoni, because while it at least pretends to be neutral, it's still pretty positive and optimistic towards him. So I will say it's at least not in a way that makes me as furious as the Baha'i Angle article does. It's at least this LA Times article has decent reporting. Like, for example, about the time Wayfarer was such a racist company to work for that they got sued about it. Somehow, that's not nearly as big a talking point as the ignorant shit in Blake Lively's past is. Though in Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer's case, multiple workplace complaints actually does come much closer to proving a pattern of misbehavior on Wayfarer's part than any so-called mean girl behavior proves that Blake has always been planning to steal this specific movie from him. From the LA Times. Whatever workplace tensions existed came to a head in 2020 and 2021 when a lawsuit alleging racial discrimination and wrongful termination brought internal grievances to light, and a separate copyright dispute involving Baldoni and Wayfarer raised questions about whether the company's stated ideals aligned with its practices. In December 2020, former Wayfarer executive Shane Norman, who is Black, filed a lawsuit alleging that he was recruited with promises of job security and professional advancement, but was later marginalized and ultimately terminated after raising concerns about racial inequities at the company. The complaint claimed that during the hiring process, Sarowitz told Norman, "We need somebody here who looks like you." But after he spoke out, particularly during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, colleagues labeled him a, quote, angry black man, end quote. Asked about Sarowitz's alleged comment, a spokesperson for Wayfarer said, "Mr. Sarowitz was not a defendant in the lawsuit. Regardless, Wayfarer Studios, Wayfarer Entertainment, and Baldoni denied this and all the material allegations in the complaint, the first amended complaint, and the second amended complaint." The lawsuit alleged that Wayfarer perpetuated a pattern of sidelining and tokenizing people of color, a dynamic that, according to the complaint, was antithetical to everything Wayfarer claimed to stand for. It further claimed that after voicing these concerns, Norman was demoted, his pay was cut, and he was ultimately terminated, while non-Black employees in similar circumstances received severance packages that he was denied. Baldoni and Wayfarer denied the allegations. In September 2021, a judge dismissed some of Norman's claims in the case, and he later filed an appeal. In April 2022, he voluntarily dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning he could not refile it. A source with knowledge of the negotiation said that Norman received approximately $150,000 to drop his claims, though the terms of any settlement were not publicly disclosed. Throughout their defense of Mr. Norman's lawsuit, Mr. Baldoni, Wayfarer Studios, and Wayfarer Entertainments vigorously denied all of Mr. Norman's claims, a spokesperson for Baldoni and Wayfarer said. In fact, public records confirm the trial court dismissed Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios from the lawsuit well before any resolution by the parties and the concurrent dismissal of the remainder of the lawsuit. Other than stating that the matter was resolved, we are unable to further comment. While I don't think that white person with Irish roots on white person with Italian roots racism is real because I was calling him baloney, I do think that my perspective as a white person isn't the most important one here, so I did ask a friend for their perspective on the sections of Man Enough where Baldoni is speaking about his own white privilege, and they said, "That whole section of the book was a big sorry for being white, and it's really boring, not just in a literary sense, but in an argumentative sense. We've heard this before. We need action." He says he took away roles meant for people of color, so is he employing people of color? Why not have a person of color instead of Cole Sprouse in 5 Feet Apart? I see a lot of apologizing and not enough action. I can empathize with the frustration of being cast as a person of color when you're not a person of color, in the sense that the United States, and by extension Hollywood, only understands Black, white, maybe Mexican, so that means if you're a bit tanner, you slip through the cracks, and I can empathize with learning and becoming a better person. I think that's great, but he spends page after page saying how apologetic he is, but I have seen nothing that shows he's actually doing something. Only hiring white women because you're a male feminist doesn't make you progressive. We also wanted to flag here that Man Enough came out in April of 2021, which meant that Justin Baldoni went from fostering the sort of workplace environment where comments that could be made to Shane Norman in 2020. While Baldoni isn't the one who has been alleged to call Shane Norman an angry black man, I don't think that Justin Baldoni gets to have credit for only the successes of his studio and not the workplace culture there. The negative things also have to reflect on him, and so that should as well. And if we take Justin Baldoni at his word for all the things he says he's learned and changed, he did that growing and learning and changing really, really fast, since it was between the complaint being filed against him and his book coming out. The copyright issue referenced in the quote from The Hollywood Reporter is also explained here, and because I haven't read anything about it in a video yet, just on streams, I'm going to go ahead and read it now. In September 2021, cystic fibrosis advocate and writer Travis Flores filed a lawsuit alleging that Baldoni, Wayfair Entertainment, and other defendants incorporated elements of his 2010 screenplay 3 Feet Distance without permission into Baldoni's 2019 film 5 Feet Apart. According to the complaint, 3 Feet Distance was optioned by an affiliate of Universal in 2015, but never produced. The lawsuit claims that in 2016, Flores shared his screenplay with a genetic testing company that had expressed interest in the project under a confidentiality agreement, and that an individual with access to the script later consulted on 5 Feet Apart. According to the complaint, after Baldoni announced 5 Feet Apart, Flores was invited to appear on Baldoni's docuseries My Last Day. Flores claimed in the lawsuit that he deliberately avoided discussing 3 Feet Distance on the show because he was concerned his participation might be used to undermine a potential copyright claim. Baldoni and the other defendants denied the allegations, and in March 2022, Flores voluntarily dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice. No determination of liability was made. According to multiple sources, Flores ultimately dropped the case after being advised by his legal team that Baldoni had the financial resources to sustain a prolonged legal fight, and that continuing the lawsuit could take a toll on his health. In late 2024, months after Flores' death at age 33, Brian Friedman, the attorney who had represented him in the case, began advocating for Baldoni in his battle with Lively. Asked why he decided to represent Baldoni after previously representing Flores in a case against him, Friedman said in a statement, "Over the years, I have learned what great people Justin and Wayfarer are. The Flores case was resolved without any determination of liability on Justin's or Wayfarer or any other defendant's part. Since then, it has been further confirmed to me that Justin and Wayfarer are exceedingly honorable and highly ethical." What's very interesting to me about the any determination of liability on Justin's part quote is that, yeah, it's just legal language. You'll find lots of stuff that strikes you as familiar once you're reading multiple things that lawyers have said or written. But also, this is the language that Friedman uses about his own sexual assault allegations, the ones that he settled for and was previously protested about, since certain parties thought that it was beyond unethical for an alleged sexual abuser to take the deposition of victims. The Hollywood Reporter asked Friedman about the allegations in an article from last year, and he said, "It has been reported that the matter was settled without any admission of liability on anyone's part. It feels highly insensitive for any response to be used as a sword or a shield." So he likes that line about, yeah, we paid, but nobody admitted any liability. Just for whatever you think that means to you, and whatever you think it means that the big feminist hired this guy. A lot of the defense of Justin Baldoni comes down to smoke and mirrors. The hope that there are enough things that can be added as qualifiers to make it so that he is in fact the victim. He is the minority. A little Italian Baha'i meow meow who acts that way because of his religion, regardless of the negative connotations that then brings onto other people who follow his religion and do not sexually harass their employees. And one of the most common finger wags that I get about my position on this, including almost unbelievably from people who assure me that they are also totally feminists and actually better feminists than me, is the accusation that I am simply blindly believing Blake Lively because she is a woman. And that's not true. It is very clearly more than that. Baldoni is not just some random man. He was her director and her co-star in a film where they were simulating intimacy as well as domestic violence. And from leaked set footage that he pretends exonerates him, we know that he did not accept her notes, input, or direct stated requests during scenes with physical intimacy, which were being filmed with no intimacy coordinator present. And also that there didn't seem to be any protections at all for Blake that an intimacy coordinator would be present until after she had threatened to walk away from the production. And on that point, the new old paparazzi videos of them kissing on set and Blake biting his lip while she was acting, I do just want to say, I do not give a single fuck about that. I don't think that it weakens her position. That was filmed presumably under the supervision of the intimacy coordinator, because it was after her protections to return to set were agreed to. I think that there's a very weird thing with this case where nobody understands what the narrative actually was. So every time a new piece comes out, they act like, as they slot it into their dumb fuck, poor little meow meow lost his movie narrative, that it somehow blows things up and changes everything. But against the actual timeline we've had from Blake, there's nothing new or troubling. I'm sorry, my brain isn't so small that I thought that somehow all of the intimate scenes were filmed before her demands included an intimacy coordinator for future intimate scenes. But back to people telling me that this is just man versus woman and that I'm always pro woman and that I wasn't actually thinking about it. Not only is this not just man versus woman, for the reasons I laid out, there are more clear power dynamics here that are not actually overshadowed by but Blake Lively is more famous if you actually understand what a power dynamic looks like. It isn't who might be more jealous of the other one, it's who has more material power over the other in that situation. But also, I do want to say, while I don't believe Blake Lively only because she's a woman, Blake being a woman is also important here, because misogyny is the guiding light that shines on this entire hate campaign against her. Blake's womanness is not so immaterial to this that I should toss it aside because I could pretend like that was a more rational take to do that. Her being a woman is why she's so disbelieved, so mocked. Why Justin can go do shirtless paparazzi walks in Hawaii every day and be totally fine, but then she is attacked and derided for going to Saturday Night Live or the premiere of her own movie. And when you rush to believe a man just so no one can accuse you of taking the woman's side because she's a woman, you're siding with a man because he's not a woman, which is being a misogynist. No level of telling me that you're a better, smarter feminist than me because you intellectualized your way into doing lip service for a sexual harasser is ever going to make me respect your feminism anymore or think that you have an opinion that I would like to hear criticism of my own opinion based on. And I don't think everybody needs to be glued to every new update as it comes out to care about this. It's fine if you're interested in my videos about other things and not about the continuing coverage that I do on this particular case. But I am continuing to talk about it because I refuse to cede the conversation to only the misogynists and the useful idiots. And despite the constant, this aged like milk comments as the press continues to swirl about all of this, I still have yet to see a single thing that has come near changing my mind, including about the fact that I just genuinely have less respect for the feminism and also critical thinking of anybody who thinks that they should side with the workplace sexual harasser here with the weird culty production company. Especially right now in the United States with the attacks on workplace protections and the EEOC itself. It is not a politically neutral thing to make your big talking point here be women be lying about workplace sexual harassment. And if you feel confronted by that being called a conservative viewpoint, it's because you have and are espousing a conservative viewpoint. Be uncomfortable enough to examine that, but I'm not holding your hand about it. That's just what happened. You shouldn't be listening to Candace Owens about this. And you also shouldn't be listening to anybody who you can tell is listening to Candace Owens about this either. But if you do want to listen to somebody who's directly heard from Candace Owens about how well this pivot into entertainment slop does for her numbers and her paycheck and her ability to spread her vile propaganda, you can listen to the episode of Power User that Taylor Lorenz was kind enough to have me guest on. We talked more about the misogyny slop ecosystem and how it serves as a right-wing pipeline. I will link it in the description below if you haven't seen it yet. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much again to Aura for sponsoring this video. And also, thank you very much to my Patreon subscribers, a few of whose names you can see on the screen right now. Patreon is a great way to help support me financially, and you get a couple extra videos from me a month over there. Thank you so much to everybody who has supported me over there, who sent me a coffee or a super thanks or super chat or anything. It is such a huge help, and I appreciate you so much. I'll be back soon. Love you. Bye.